So when working with teachers, an important thing in terms of oral language is to help teachers think about the integration between speaking, listening, reading, writing, and viewing. These are what the standards are, and these are what we try and help students to see, that we don't separate those things. We look at their relationship to each other. So the most important thing that I begin to teach my teachers is how to observe children's literacy behaviors. So when you meet a child, how are you going to observe their ability to speak, both socially or academically in school? How are you going to observe their ability to listen? In what context are they listening? Can they listen in the large group? Can they listen in the small group? Do they talk in the large group? Do they talk in the small group? Do they talk with a partner? Do they have social conversations with students? Do they engage in academic conversations? All of those conversation and the research that I build with my students, early research in early childhood, is that when children have opportunities to talk with adults who scaffold their language, who have conversations with them, that they develop the necessary skills that help them to become proficient readers and writers and thinkers, more important, thinkers. And so what happens early in life is they develop these words that are deep meaning of words, vocabulary words, things that are important to them. And then when they come into kindergarten and into first grade and second grade, all of a sudden, these words that they've learned, they now see in books. And we teach them how to access these words. So we teach them how to access them by looking at a whole word. We teach them how to access them by thinking about the sounds in words. And we teach them how to access them by thinking about the context of words. So it makes sense if you see a bee and someone is eating something and it's yellow, that word could be banana. And then we check it out. And the theorist that we use in the reading and literacy program and in our reading courses is Mary Clay. And what Mary Clay teaches our teachers is to give children multiple entryways into reading and writing and listening and speaking, and that you're always paying attention to those things when you're looking at a child. So you're paying attention to the form of their language. How do they speak? What do they pick up? So often children pick up words and you wonder where they pick them up, and they're using them properly, but they've heard them. They've heard the teacher use them, and all of a sudden you're hearing your language back in the classroom. Pay attention to how they learn new vocabulary words. As a teacher, we help kids to become aware that they know some words, and when they read and when they listen to books from Read Aloud, they're going to learn other words. And to be curious about words. That's a very important thing that we're trying to teach our teachers, to have kids be curious that if I hear a word that the teacher's reading or the teacher says or somebody says, that I feel comfortable enough to say, what is that word? I don't know that word. So the importance in school is that the teacher is paying attention to children's development. So children come in to pre-K and kindergarten and first grade. Some of them are emergent. They haven't been that interested in words and in reading. Words are all around them. They don't come in an empty slate. They come in with a lot of different life experiences, things that they're picking up, and all of a sudden they begin to see that, oh, I know that word. So many children, they know pizza, they know milk, they know cereal, they know McDonald's, they know Burger King, they know all of those words because that's been part of their life. And then they have other words that are cultural words that are part of their family and ways in which their family engage. And so it's important that a teacher's paying attention to that. What the child comes to school with themselves and a cultural background and a family and a life experience. And so as the teacher, it's important to observe that. And then as you're observing that in individual children, then you start to think about, okay, what are the ways that I can bring children together around their strengths and around their needs and help to figure out what do they know. So who are the children that actually know their sounds and have an approach? Who are the children that are able to just see words and figure it out. Who are the children that are making sense of words? So in my classroom, I have to, when I think about the use of language, I have to give children opportunities. And so I'm teaching teachers, what opportunities do you give children to clarify and to ask questions? We ask them to pay attention to the teacher talk and the children talk. Look at the balance of that. How often do kids get an opportunity to ask questions to you, to ask questions to each other, so that they need that kind of experience with language, and they need the time to think about it. So not quick have an answer to a question, but have an opportunity that, so often we tell our teachers, a child is saying something, so tell me more. Take a minute and think. You don't have to do it quickly. So those are some of the ways that we try and help teachers to really pay attention to that. We also are asking teachers when children are trying to figure out things, oftentimes children need a chance to act it out, to role play it, to talk to a partner about it. So they need to think about, they come into school with the language of the here and now, and while they're in school, they're listening to the language of the future, of the past. They have to keep all these language structures together. And so they need to use that here and now. They need to take something that is in a book that we just read and make it here and now, make it their own. Use their bodies, use their own language in thinking about it. The other thing that children need to do that you're helping them with language development in school is to collaborate and to cooperate with one another. And that's language use. That's the pragmatics of language. That's, I think, is the hardest thing to help teachers understand, that if you teach kids the pragmatic of language in their own life, then when they're reading something in a book and there's an issue with the character having a pragmatic problem, they begin to relate to that and see, oh, like Amelia Bedelia, she has a lot of problems because she doesn't understand figures of speech. There's a lot of different characters that have, that they work out problems, and there's Frog and Toad for early readers, and there's in Roald Dahl books, there's lots of problems that the characters have, and when the student has an opportunity to think about that in the context of their own life and the context of oral language first, then they can use that. So I see my teachers thinking about what are the ways that when I'm teaching the child about comprehension, that I can help them think about what are some of the tactics that they have, what are the resources, what are the background knowledge. We always talk about that each of us comes to a task with a certain kind of background knowledge. And when my students don't have background knowledge, then I have to build that background knowledge. And so an important thing that what we have to do is children should have opportunity to share their stories. So when they have morning meetings, and they should have an opportunity to connect, not just to share their stories, but to teaching children to listen to each other. Share your story, listen to your friend's story. How are your stories the same and different? What are the ways in which these stories are very different? How are they the same? Curriculum is really important in terms of helping children to develop their oral language. They need to be studying something. So it's really important that they're studying in science and in social studies content that's really interesting, so that they can test their knowledge and so that they can think about what are their questions. Teaching children to have questions helps them then, when they're reading, to use that idea of questioning and to gather information from a text. When they're writing, if they get an opportunity to, early on in pre-K and in kindergarten and sometimes in first grade, we encourage teachers for children who are not quite ready, and the mechanics, all the different mechanics of writing. When you think about writing, you have the composition, you have the ideas. Then you have to think about the actual writing, um, forming the letters, and then you have to think about the letter sounds. And in the same way in reading, we're thinking about some children hear the sounds, some children see the word. They saw it somewhere and they just know how to write it because it's a picture. And early on, words are more pictures for children in kindergarten, particularly pre-K and kindergarten and sometimes in first grade, that a word looks like a picture. So that they can sometimes, they can write down milk, or they can write down pizza, or they can write down stop, because it was a picture of words. But they don't necessarily know stop when they start. And then in kindergarten, first grade, you build on that knowledge. Okay, you know that word. Let's look at the letter sounds in that word. So the important thing for a teacher to do is to continually engage children and find out what they know about language and what helps them to gather more language. And a lot of times in classrooms, teachers need opportunities to how to help kids have conversations with one another. Because one of the strategies that we use is think, pair, share, or turn to a partner. And often teachers do that so quick that there's kids in the classroom that don't have enough opportunities. So teachers need to model, what would I do if I was talking to my partner? You be my partner. Let's talk about the character in this book. I'm going to say this, you're going to say, and you're going to have a chance to talk. And talking and listening and giving children language in which to say, I'm going to build on that idea. Or I have a different idea. Or I think I'm confused by that idea. Can you tell me some more about that? So helping the teacher modeling that, and then giving the children opportunity to do that. And I think the most difficult, what I've observed, most difficult format for many, many children is the large group. In the large group, and many teachers use the large group as one of their strategies, and it's not bad to use it as a teaching strategy, but to really develop language, children need opportunities where that the large group doesn't provide, because if there are 20 students there's usually maybe 5 to 10 who feel more comfortable speaking in that large group. So often what I tell teachers, if you're going to have a large group, and you want to have a large group because you want everyone to hear, I say you need to prepare those students who you know do not speak in a large group. Prepare them to be able to have this conversation. So oftentimes you can bring those students together in a smaller group and say, tomorrow we're going to be we're studying restaurants. And tomorrow we're going to be interviewing the chef. And we're going to be coming up with some questions about what you would ask a chef. So let's think about a chef. Let's think about what a chef does. And, another word for a chef is a cook. The chef cooks. And then showing them pictures and then bringing them to the meeting, and maybe having the large meeting, because often if you're going to interview a chef, probably it might be the whole class, and providing that scaffold for those children who don't necessarily feel as comfortable in the large group. Now this lends itself to writing, because if you have an experience about meeting a chef, and you go to a restaurant and you see a kitchen, you take pictures, you draw sketches, you talk with the chef, you experience perhaps some smells in the kitchen, or maybe even, if you're lucky, the chef shows you something he's cooking. Doesn't always happen, but unless he comes to your classroom. But you, in that deep experience, and talking about things and having those multiple entry points, because I think that's the other really important thing, is multiple entry points, then a child comes and then can begin to write about what was most meaningful for them. And when they're a first grader, it might be a sentence. I like the knife in the kitchen, or I saw that the chef had a lot of bowls in the kitchen. And so in that situation, you're helping children to write about, which is the most important thing in writing, something that's meaningful, something that means something to them. And whether it's a personal story or whether you're doing it in research, they found this particular thing. And up until the point that the child feels you comfortable, there's sometimes children don't have a lot more to say than they can actually write. And so it's frustrating for some children. So sometimes it's getting them to write down as much as they can, and then the teacher doing a shared experience with them. So I think in terms of teachers, I think when they are thinking about oral language, I think they need to look at their day. And they need to think about when a child comes in during the day, the first thing in the day, what are the opportunities does that child have to speak? To speak to, so if they have a morning meeting, when do they get to speak? If they're working with a partner, how do they get to speak? If they're working with a group, how do they get to speak? When is it done independently, so that they're doing it by themselves, or when is the teacher scaffolding? And so in the early grades, I find that the children need opportunity to just try it out, and then for the teacher to come and see who needs more assistance with that, which is why it's really important that teachers develop their observational skills and really look at what that child's able to do and what children are not able to do. And then it's important that the teacher scaffolds. So if this is a child who really has a hard time working with another student, maybe there's issues with that child in terms of the vocabulary, or maybe the child is processing language at a different speed than the other child, and so it's important and sometimes children can explain things to other children that adults have a harder time. So I think using the resource of children in terms of language and language development, in terms of reading, and also in terms of language, that they are they're the teachers in the classroom, the other teachers in the classroom that are really important. So as a teacher educator, I'm constantly helping my teachers to assess what do I know about this child's speaking? What do I know about this child's ability to listen? What do I know about this child's ability to read? And when I'm thinking about reading, I'm thinking about the actual decoding, but I'm also thinking about reading comprehension. So is this a child, when I read a story to the child, that they can understand, that they understand the elements, that they get into a fiction story, a nonfiction story, or poetry, and they listen to the words? Is this a child who can eventually do that on their own when they're thinking about writing? What is it that the child, can they draw a picture in the beginning that gives full details about what they're thinking about, a full story, where that if they showed me that picture, they could begin to show me, I went to the park, I went on a play date, I was with my mother, I was with my best friend, and our dog came, and we were on the swings. And if I see in that picture all of those things, then I can begin to help the child label that picture. I can begin to help the child think about what might be one thing they want to say about it. And so I'm moving them along. I'm taking their life experience, and I'm thinking about what are the ways that I can access that information. And I think that's the most difficult part about teaching, because not everyone's going to get information in the same way. And so it requires me as a teacher to be paying attention to how that child's moving along, when that child is making sense. So when a classroom teacher is concerned about a child's language, I often say to them, okay, so when do you observe the child speaking spontaneously? When do you observe the child engaged in language, the language of the classroom, the language of school? And when do you find the child disengaged? And I think it's in really paying attention to all the children in your classroom. And then after you're doing that, then thinking about how can I instruct them? because it's hard to think of instructing individual children. But as you observe those individual children, you can think about how can I instruct them in small groups? What can I do in the large group? And how can I move them ahead? And it's that continual assessment and paying attention to that and keeping, I think the other important thing is keeping a theoretical frame, knowing that children develop language, whether you have monolingual children or children who have two languages, to be paying attention to what do you notice about the form of their language? What do you notice about the vocabulary? How do they use language? To keep that theoretical frame. And that's what I try and do with my graduate students, to try and help them to how am I observing that? And you can take that then across speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Because you can take that across thinking about what do they understand about particular texts? What texts get in the way for them? I find sometimes that some of the boys in my classroom didn't like fictional texts. They liked the nonfiction text. And when we had discussions about that, it was because of the inferencing. They had more trouble with, they didn't like that with the nonfiction text, it was the boats did this or the bugs did this or whatever. That wasn't for everyone, but that was some of the readers. So when you find that out about a kid, how do you help them enter into that story? This would be you'd like this story. Here's the way into this story. And the same thing when you're thinking about writing. That we certainly start kids in kindergarten and first grade and second grade with stories about their life, to write about something that's important to them. And I think that if I'm continually knowing that as I think a teacher all the way up, because I see this with my graduate students, that when I'm teaching my graduate class in literacy, I basically tell them, I'm teaching you a new vocabulary. Let's think about how you're going to learn this new vocabulary, how you're going to take it on, and how you're going to. And I think that's, as a teacher, if we realize, as a literacy teacher, if we realize we're always helping our students develop their speaking, develop their listening, develop their reading, and developing their writing. And if I always have, and viewing has become, was always around, but it has become more important, how I take in the visual, whether it be words or whether it be images, and how I process that. If I continually think about that, and I look at my day, and I think about, and then I look at my week, and then I look across my month, what opportunities have I provided my students in order to engage with that, to engage in the oral language, to engage in reading, and how have I taken a reading task and allowed oral language to support it? Or how have I taken a writing task and allowed oral language to support it? And they go back and forth and back and forth. And I think if you keep that in mind, and you keep in mind as a teacher, by the end of this grade, I'm going to notice something different about my students' language. They're going to have maybe, hopefully, pragmatically, they're going to have developed, and hopefully they've developed the vocabulary and the sophistication of their language. How many words they decide to use, and how they understand that there's the language of social and the language of academic. And that's something I'm paying attention to in the class, and something I try and help my teachers to pay attention to.